Hi and welcome to UI Made Simple. In this tutorial we are going to have a look at how to set up per platform settings for your mouse and keyboard and gamepad. If you watched the previous video about how to set up common UI, you remember that in the common input settings under game we have a bunch of platforms where we can set up bespoke configurations for our controller data. Controller data here is a bit misleadingly named because it doesn't apply just for controllers, as in gamepads, but it also applies to mouse, keyboard, touch, and so on. So it basically symbolizes any sort of hardware controlling data for this platform. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a controller data for mouse and keyboard and one for the gamepad, and we'll see how that reacts in game. I'm going to head up to my UI folder and I'm going to create a new folder called input. In this input, we can right click and create a new blueprint class, which will be a controller common input base controller data. Long name, but if you just type in controller data, you should be fine and find it. Call this mouse and keyboard controller data. Open this up. And we see we have a bunch of settings here. The first thing that we are interested in is the input type. In my case, it will be mouse and keyboard because this is specifically for mouse and keyboard. All the gamepad settings will be grayed out because we are not using gamepad settings. So I'm going to collapse this. Controller texture and controller button mask texture, we are not usually using this. If you want the controller texture, it's usually the icon that appears to represent this controller data. So for example, for Xbox, you'll have the Xbox silhouette, for PlayStation, the PlayStation 1, and so on. I'm going to leave these empty for now. What we are interested in is this input brush data map. When we add an entry in this data map, we see we can add a key and map it to a brush. So I'm going to import just one key for now. We're going to work with the letter E. In my textures folder from UI, I'm going to drag in this letter E texture here. It's called keyboard E outline. I'm going to make sure this is part of the UI texture group and save it. And now back to my controller data, we want to add a new entry, map to the key E, and then the input brush will be this, and just hit this button so I can use it directly. Image size 6464 is fine, and I will leave the rest of the settings like that. We can even preview it here. If we want it to be, my image is white, so if you want it to be black, we can just drag this color, make it any other color that we want. I'll make it blue. Below the input brush data map, we have an input brush key sets. This is very useful if you have a shortcut type of key. So for example, if we want to use key E and key Q at the same time, but use a single texture for this, we can. So usually it's used for like arrow keys left and right to move left and right and then import the texture that symbolizes both left and right, or shortcuts such as Shift plus or Alt plus, or on gamepad if you want something for both sticks and so on. Basically shortcut combinations. Now that I have set up my key E in the input brush data map, I'm going to get rid of the shortcut inputs because I'm not going to use these now. Make sure we save and compile this blueprint and then head over to the project settings, common input settings, and Windows. We see the default input type is mouse and keyboard. It supports mouse and keyboard, that is correct. We don't support touch. We will support gamepad, so we'll leave this enabled for now and leave this gamepad name as Windows for now. And then inside the controller data, we can hit plus, and now we should see our blueprint for mouse and keyboard controller data available here. So we can set this up. It automatically saves, so we are all sorted there. Just so we see how this works in action, I'm going to create another controller data, this time for the gamepad. and I'm going to call this BP generic gamepad. This is the type of gamepad that you would normally connect to your PC, or if you don't have a branded gamepad like Xbox or PlayStation, you can just connect any gamepad and it will have this generic gamepad layout. If we head over inside this blueprint, now we need to set the input type to gamepad. And now we have a bunch of options which are available for us. The gamepad name is currently set to none. Let's set this to generic. The gamepad display name could be the same, so let's set this to generic as well. We don't have a category. We don't need a category. We don't need a name, and we don't necessarily need an ID mapping either. This is if you have multiple gamepads with unique ID mappings, you can add them here. Same as before, controller texture and controller mask texture, we don't necessarily need to configure this, but I'm going to add an action inside my input brush data map. I'm going to use the texture for the south face button. I think it's usually X on PlayStation controller and A on generic controllers. If you are looking for free to use input action icons, I've left a link in the description to Keeny's page, who has a bunch of different styled input actions which are free to use for your project. Just check it out and maybe leave a donations for him, because he's doing a lot of very useful UI now that we've added our button A, we've set the input texture group to BUI. We can head over to our generic gamepad actions, go add a new action, let's set the button to be south face, oh, maybe face bottom, and then for the key, we are going to use this Xbox button A that I've just added. Save this, and now head over back to the project settings, and because we want to use gamepad on this on Windows as well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another controller data here, which is going to be my generic gamepad. Now, for the default gamepad name, you have to be very careful because this is string based, but we basically want the exact same name as it is set here. So you see this gamepad name is set to generic. We want to literally type in, instead of Windows, generic here. So it picks up the data from this generic gamepad when we connect the generic controller to our Windows. If we want to see this in action, there is a very easy way to do that. We can set up an input action widget into our HUD, and then if we have an action available for our input already mapped, then we can see this changing between the controller and the keyboard. So let's do that. I'm going to head over to my HUD widget, which I have created here, and I'm going to add action widget, common action widget into my HUD. We're gonna move it at the bottom and give it a little bit of padding so we can see it better. And then you see in the common action widget, we have already a bunch of settings. We can give it a design time key to preview, for example, E, and you see it'll pop up with the blue E that I've set up. Or if you want to see the bottom gamepad one, again, it will show what we've set up in our controller. Or we can give this input action already an action to display at runtime, but we have to make sure that this enhanced input action is also mapped to the player to be displayed. If you haven't already, make sure that the enhanced input is enabled in your UI. If you head over to the project settings and look for enhanced input support, you make sure that inside game common input settings enhanced input support is enabled. Otherwise you won't be able to use enhanced input actions for anything in the common UI. So I will go and create an input action for my E key and say input action. Let's call this input action UI confirm. Now that we have our confirm action, we also need to make sure this is mapped somewhere. So in our third person character, I can see that we already have an IMC default associated with the player. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add our input action here so we don't have to worry about adding another IMC for now. If you are not using the third person character template from Epic, then you probably will not have this IMC default linked to your player. If you do have an IMC already on your player, feel free to add it there. Otherwise, you might have to create your own IMC and map this action separately, whichever fits your project best. I'm gonna add the gamepad one as well. Make sure that, again, that this is on tap. Like so, save this. Now in our HUD widget, we can associate our common action widget to the enhanced input action that we've created, which is IA UI confirm, and close it down. If we head over to the game now and press play, we'll see that we have our E added here. Maybe it's a bit hard to see because it's blue on white, but there is a little E on the game there. I have my controller connected as well. So if I start using the controller, immediately after I start using the controller, you see it changes to A because it detects an input change and it will use the action associated with the controller, which we've set up to be the generic controller and the input A. As soon as I start using the mouse again, you see it detects the input and it changes it back to E. This will be everything for this video. This is how you set up per platform input actions. In the next video, we're going to have a look at how to use styles in Common UI. Thank you for watching.